You can see them in their double-breasted suits and their ties. They're waving a flag which looks a variation on the tricolore. When they meet Gouraud, though you can't hear it here, they will speak a French that will be as perfect as if it were spoken on the boulevard of Paris.
The Christian Maronites lobbied for the creation of a state that they would dominate. They wanted territory more than 3 times the size of their traditional homeland, centered on Mount Lebanon. If granted, this would bring large numbers of Muslims, almost half of the country, under Christian Maronite rule. The Maronites got their way. In 1920, General Gouraud proclaimed the new state, Greater Lebanon.
These pictures of General Gouraud are terribly important because he was a key player in the creation of the modern Middle East. And the creation of Greater Lebanon was to a large extent his personal decision.
But for the people of the region, Gouraud's decision came at a heavy price.
The separation of Lebanon and Syria was violent. Cities that had always enjoyed trade relations and whose people had moved freely back and forth now found themselves in 2 different countries, which broke long-standing economic ties, family ties, and a notion of a broader community.
To many Arabs, the transfer of power to the French was a betrayal. They'd fought alongside the British in their battles against the Ottomans. Now, it seemed, the British were reneging on their promise to support the cause of Arab independence. And in creating Greater Lebanon from peoples of diverse religious and ethnic backgrounds, the European powers had set in motion conflict that would continue to the present day. While France governed Lebanon and Syria, Britain took control of Iraq, Transjordan, and Palestine. Albert Kahn sent his photographers on 3 separate missions to Jerusalem in the years following the Great War. In December 1917, the capture of Palestine by British troops had been one of the great military triumphs of World War I. For the first time in over 500 years, the Holy Land was under Christian rule. By the time the British arrived, Jerusalem was battered and war-weary. More than 1/3 of the population had either fled or died.
The British soldiers, when they came into Jerusalem, they didn't find the golden city of God. They really found a very, very desperate village which had gone through years of starvation and with no services at all, no water, no medical services, no food. So this was a city where hunger and starvation resided, not God.
I remember my father told me that the hardest years were the years of the war. They were very poor. They went years of great hunger, great poverty, to such a point that a simple commodity, such as table salt, was too expensive to buy. When we look at the pictures and we see the dust, I mean, these pictures bring the dust. They don't glamorize it. They don't romanticize it. I wonder to myself, what would it be like to live at that time? What did the people feel? What would it be like to walk in these streets?
At the end of Ottoman rule, Palestine was home to 750,000 Arabs. Some were Bedouins who lived off the land.
Bedouins are very romantic in the sense they expand in nature around them. They like to be alone, not because they are, antisocial, but because they have this discourse with themselves and nature.
Traditionally, the lives of Bedouin people revolved around their villages and their families. For centuries, they'd lived peacefully alongside the country's Muslims and Jews.
When my grandmother, for example, married my grandfather, she married when she was 13. It was the Jewish neighbor who showed her how to cook, who showed her how to domesticate her husband, who trained her. It's a different world.
We became very friendly with the Arabs living next door. In fact, the old lady next door was almost as much as my grandmother, as my real grandmother. I spent a lot of time there. I used to call her Auntie Maftin. Both my mother and my grandmother spoke Arabic, so they could converse freely with the Arabs. And the Arabs spoke Hebrew. As a matter of fact, today, there's no doubt that there are many more Arabs who speak a good Hebrew than there are Jews who even begin to understand Arabic.
There was no awareness of difference. There was a closeness, a great closeness between Muslims and Jews.
But this harmony was about to be torn apart by a controversial British policy. Jewish Zionists had been calling for the creation of a national homeland in Palestine. After years of campaigning, they persuaded the British Foreign Secretary, Lord Balfour, to back their cause. In 1917, Balfour wrote a letter to one of the leaders of this movement.
His Majesty's government views with favour the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, it being understood that nothing should be done which may prejudice the rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine.
The letter, which became known as the Balfour Declaration, would have profound implications for the future of Palestine.
In that seemingly simple statement, Balfour had made actually quite a huge commitment. He had now wedded British policy to create a Jewish entity in Palestine.
For the Muslims of Palestine, the Zionist campaign was a threat. These pictures show one of France's most senior clerics, Cardinal Dubois, arriving in Jerusalem on a diplomatic and religious mission. Cardinal Dubois was there to voice concerns against Balfour's pro-Zionist policy.
We are approaching Christmas of 1919. It's very cold in Jerusalem, very rainy. Cardinal Dubois' visit is a combination of PR and pilgrimage and diplomacy and demonstration.
Cardinal Dubois was carrying a petition signed by Palestinian Muslims opposed to the Balfour Declaration. It read, "In the name of justice and of equality, we ask you not to allow Jewish immigration to Palestine and to remove from us the Zionist danger. We cannot permit this without sacrificing our precious blood." But Balfour ignored the protests of Palestine's Muslim population. Britain's commitment to a Zionist homeland ignited tensions between Jews and Muslims.
Balfour belonged to a group of Christian Zionists. He belonged to those people who knew the names of mountains and rivers of Palestine before he knew names of mountains and rivers in England. He knew the kings of the Bible before he learned anything about British kings. So he felt very strongly about the Holy Land. He felt very strongly about the Jewish people. He felt very strongly about the need to return. And of course, he saw that he had the opportunity to be the one who returns the Jews to the Holy Land.
In 1925, Kahn's photographers followed Lord Balfour on his historic visit to Jerusalem. In the years since he'd made his famous declaration, almost 100,000 Jews had arrived in Palestine. Balfour laid foundation stones at the Hebrew University, an institution intended to turn Hebrew to a living language and give the new Jewish settlers a strong national identity.
We are now 7 years after the publication of the Balfour Declaration. Thousands of Jews already live in Palestine as a result of that declaration. The Zionist dream starts to realize itself. And here, the man himself comes to Jerusalem to attend the opening of the Hebrew University on Mount Scopus in Jerusalem. And this is an extraordinary event. These pictures are extraordinary because this was a very, very political event in the history of this country.
There were about, I would reckon, about 20,000 people present there. And among them were my father and mother, who were invited, because my father was considered a prominent member of the Jewish community. I can see the great enthusiasm with which especially Balfour was greeted.
When the invited guests see him walking up Mount Scopus, to them he is the Messiah, he is the Redeemer. He is the man who is actually returning the Jewish people from exile to their own country for the first time in 2,000 years.
To rapturous crowds, Balfour outlined his vision of a new Jewish homeland.
This is a new experiment. It has never been tried before. Unless I have profoundly mistaken the genius of the Jewish people. The experiment is predestined to inevitable success, on which not only men of Jewish birth, but others sharing the common civilization of the world will have reason to congratulate themselves.
I would say he looked messianic. I can't think of any other word. He was wearing one of these university robes, and he had this hair that was all over the place, and he was using his hands a lot as he spoke. My parents told me, "This is it. That's what we've been waiting for."
After laying the foundations at the Hebrew University, Balfour visited the new collective farms which were being set up by Jews across Palestine. These settlements were built on land bought from the Arabs.
Lord Balfour's visit to Palestine was something of a triumphal tour of the architect of the Jewish national home coming to see the first fruits of this pledge, this promise, this policy.
As you see in the pictures, he was greeted with great enthusiasm. Young girls in blouses and short skirts and with flowers around their heads and waving flags.
I think one of the most interesting pictures is where you see the Star of David, somewhat makeshift Star of David, and the British flag together, and that really symbolizes everything.
Many of the Jews cheering Balfour